Getting more unique and different shots is always a bit of a challenge when you are creating video. Nowadays, so many tools are incredibly accessible. And so, how do you actually change things up and get some unique perspectives? I think today I can show you one product that can give you a certain aspect of those things if you want to create certain types of shots. And I'm talking about the Neewer Autodolly. This is actually a kind of a mini car with 3 wheels that can drive on smooth surfaces, and it has mounting points for your camera or smartphone. Now, Neewer sent this to me, and I have had a chance to test this out throughout the last few weeks to try and see what kind of shots I could get with this. For example, in the realm of product videography, where you want to highlight certain features and you want to kind of drive in a circle around something. Or if you, for example, want to showcase a house or a room or stuff like that, where you want to have more greater distances covered, but you want to have a really smooth push into a room or something like that. Now, creatively, I've also been inspired to try this out because of time-lapse creations with, for example, a GoPro on top of here, a smartphone, or a bigger camera. But first, now let's talk about what is in the box, how to set this thing up, and also what you are able to do with it. And then I will also talk about some of the limitations and aspects that you have to be aware of when you are looking into the Neewer Autodolly. Now, the box is simply a cardboard box with an inlay where the Neewer Dolly is actually nice and snugly placed inside so that it doesn't rattle around or stuff like that. But I think that's already as interesting as it gets. Then you also get the manual. In my case, I have the Chinese, the English, and the German version because I am in Germany after all. Then of course you have the Neewer Autodolly, and this actually has 2 free spinning wheels, so these here left and right, and this here in the back is the wheel that is actually motorized. Now on the side, you can see that you have a speed indicator as well as the charging indicator. Then you have a speed and a reverse or forward direction change button. On the other hand, you have the charging port, and the battery internally has about 6 hours worth of usage. So it is really a lot of juice that you get in here. And then you have the on and off switch to turn this thing on and off. Now, when you look at this from the bottom, you can also see that there is actually more rubber on these wheels than you might first think. And that is because this dolly is actually also compatible with certain types of sliders, meaning you can actually put this on rails and, for example, use it outdoors when you are in the grass or something like that. And that way you have a really lightweight and travelable surface to always use this with. Now, when you have it in the configuration that I have here, without any slider or stuff like that, then you can basically only use this on tables as well as extremely smooth surfaces on the ground, for example, wooden floors or stuff like that. However, if there are more bumps or grooves in the surface that you are trying to traverse, then this might not be the right thing for you. Now then, of course, you also have a screw, and the interesting part about that is that you actually have both ways. So you have this smaller one, which usually fits into a camera, for example, or also some tripod mounting plates. And then you have this back part here, which you can use, for example, for bigger tripod heads like the one right here. To be able to use both of these positions, you actually have 2 mounting holes right here at the top. When you screw it into the bigger one right there, then of course you have the smaller one available for yourself to use with whatever you want to put there. And if you put it in the reverse position, then you have the bigger one, and you can, for example, add a mounting plate or a mounting head like this one with the bigger mount on the bottom. I think it's really cool that they made that possible so that you don't need to carry anything extra around or have any adapters additionally. Then we also have the remote, and this can actually go play and pause, so it can start and stop the movement. It can reverse, and that already starts the movement immediately. So this is basically like a play in reverse button. And then we also have the speed change button, and as you can see here on the side, when I press that, you can see the speed indicator go up and then go lower again. The speed can be changed in 3 steps. In my personal opinion, it could be possible to make it a little slower even, specifically for the use with, for example, time-lapse photography. There, it would be really handy to have it slower. However, I also noticed that when you are in those slower modes, it is possible that you get more jitters when the movement is happening because the motor might not be able to go that slow. I'm not really sure why those things are happening, but in the faster mode, it is more consistent in terms of the movement. Lastly, we have the boring stuff, of course, a charging cable. This is a micro USB cable. an Allen key so you can actually get this off if you have tightened it too hard. And then also some replacement rubber pieces for the wheels and one more rubber piece that you can use with the top mounting screw. However, I don't use that at all. Now, Neewer sent me the basic version of this Autodolly, which does not include any extra things like ball heads, phone mounting plates, or stuff like that. However, I'm aware that those are also available on Amazon. So if you check this out yourself, you might be able to pick one up if you want to have those things also. However, if you already have those lying around, you might get away with getting this cheaper version. For example, use your own already existing ball heads, phone mounting plates, and stuff like that. Now, I've tested this with this one right here. This is a small rig ball head, and I love this thing. Have about 4 or 5 of these around the apartment because I want to have this everywhere where I would want to put my camera. And that is because this is an Arca Swiss compatible plate right here, and I use Arca Swiss compatible plates on my cameras and everything. So that is of course really, really useful, and I will also link this in the description below. But that basically goes on top of here, and then I was able to put my Canon EOS R on top of this Autodolly. Now, something you have to keep in mind here is that the max weight of this thing is classified for 3 kilograms. Now, the Canon EOS R and the lenses that I'm using are below that. However, you actually also have to really take into consideration the weight distribution of whatever you want to put on here. And in my case, for example, with the Canon EOS R and the 15-35, it happens in many different configurations that actually is very front heavy. And by being that way, it actually kind of tipped over forward or sometimes to the side and stuff like that, depending on how I wanted to shoot in that specific situation. So keep that in mind, and maybe you need another mounting plate right here, for example, a really long Arca Swiss compatible one, so that you can, for example, push the camera to the back or something like that for making those adjustments for that weight distribution. Now, where you don't really have any problems is when you want to use this with a smartphone. And in this case, I have my iPhone here in a clamp by Ulanzi. That one then is adapted to a cold shoe mount because that sometimes helps me, for example, to put lights on top of these kind of mini ball heads. And then this small ball head right here. And that combination then I was able to put on here by removing this, of course, and putting it in the other direction because this ball head has the smaller screw right there. And then I can put this on top of here. Usually I don't spin this with the camera in there, but let's do it this way now. And now we have the camera on here. And just like that, you have a motorized camera that, for example, can do things like move from left to right. But speaking about movements, what kind of movements are possible with this? Generally speaking, I think the easiest movement would be to put it, of course, in normal forward and backwards. And now I'm gonna speed things up a little bit so that you can actually see this. And if I hit the play button, you can see it is actually moving, and pushing the reverse button, it actually is moving into the other direction. Now, this might be an interesting move, for example, to move over something. And I have a shot, for example, where I do this with the ATEM Mini, where you can see that slow movement over all the buttons. So that is already something that can be really interesting for long products, for example. However, of course, you can also turn this around and then fasten it again. And with this, you're doing a push toward something. So if I hit the play button, now the camera is moving toward the camera. And if I hit the reverse button, it does the same thing and pulls away. So you can do stuff like that. And those are the kind of basic movements of just straight toward something or straight from left to right or the other way around. Now, however, it gets more interesting when you actually turn this over and you, for example, want to drive around something. And I have a couple examples here, but basically you put the wheels in an angle and you have a bit of an indicator right there. So you can actually see what you are setting so that also both of the wheels are mostly the same direction. And then you can hit the play button and it is actually driving in a somewhat circle. Now, this is something that is really interesting. However, it is also something where it is kind of finicky to try and figure out where the center of gravity is for this circle and camera and lens combination and all of those things. The best thing here I figured out was just to go with trial and error. There's not really a fast rule. However, I'm sure if you do the math of like focal length and the radius and all of those things, you might also be able to just really figure it out and then set it up that way. And maybe there's even a way to I don't know, put a contraption on here to guide where the center of the rotation should be so that you have an easier time setting these things up. But generally speaking, I just found that I had to try and test out how far do I have to go away from the product, what kind of a focal length do I want to use, and then just try it multiple times and see how it looks and if it actually works. And for example, if the product stays in the center and doesn't drift out of frame easily. So that's also possible. However, with certain changes, you can of course also do completely weird things, like for example, putting both of these wheels here in the middle or basically the maximum position. And that way the camera is actually basically moving around itself. So this is not a perfect moving around itself, but at least it is kind of like moving around a center point. So those are some of the things that you can do with the Neewer Autodolly. I think it's really cool to add this to the creative tool belt. On that note, something I find really cool is that this is actually really small and lightweight, which means you can just throw it into your backpack and have it ready when the time comes for these types of shots to come in handy. Now in the beginning, I mentioned that I'm also going to talk about some limitations and drawbacks or things that I would prefer if they were done differently. First of all, it is kind of weird and strange that there is no button to play and pause or drive and stop on the device itself. The only way to stop the movement on this thing is actually with the remote or with the on-off switch. When you are switching it on and off, then it is also going to not move immediately, but only start moving when you are hitting the reverse or forward button. However, with the remote, you do have the play and pause functionality. So maybe that is an oversight. There could have been a button for this to be able to also do this without the remote. That is specifically interesting, for example, when the remote dies in terms of, for example, the battery going empty, or you just don't have it available anymore, or you forgot it at home, something like that. Then also the weight distribution situation, but that is also something that is not really the fault of the device itself. It's just something that is a bit tricky to get right. Then we also have the situation with trying to get the angles correct and trying to figure out where to move things. So that's also something that might be interesting to kind of be aware that this is not necessarily the easiest thing. I also would like to see the motors to go slower, specifically for the purpose of doing time lapses with movement. In those instances where we really want to drag out the time that it takes from A to B, 1.4 centimeters per second is just simply not enough. For example, it just takes about 100 seconds or 2 minutes roughly to go over 1.5 meters. And that, of course, is already the table length of a full table. Now, if you want to have a time lapse of that, that's not going to show anything. For that purpose, it would be really nice if this could go much slower or even have a way to, for example, control the interval that it moves. So move, stop, wait, move, stop, wait, and so on and so forth. However, again, for the price and the tininess and the simplicity and all of those things, it is already doing a lot, and that not necessarily all that bad. However, there's one more thing that I do have to mention, and that is that the consistency of the speed and also the movement is sometimes a little of the thing that has variability. Specifically in the beginning when it is starting up, that is something that you also have to keep in mind, that there can be vibrations and movements, and of course also sometimes it is a little jittery when you are starting that with, for example, a heavier camera on top. So that is something to keep in mind. And also in terms of just overall, when you don't have a really smooth and level surface, then it can be that this device cannot go as far or as fast as you might expect it to go. And it might actually just stop and spin its wheel because it cannot go further. So this is also something to keep in mind. The friction of these wheels is not the highest. If you again have any bumps or something like grooves on the surface, that might not work. And if you want to really have the best result possible, it is probably the best idea to look into a slider, and also the one that is compatible with this one, because that is also an option for you. And there you have that availability of a smooth surface every time. In my opinion, the Neewer Autodolly is doing its job quite nicely when you know how to work with it. And it is a great addition to your creative tool belt. Now, of course, if you have any questions, you can leave those in the comment section down below. If you want to buy the Neewer Autodolly, there are links in the description. And if you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up. That's always helpful. And with all that said, I hope you have an amazing day, make it your life, and I will see you in the next one. Ciao, ciao.